America is a beacon of freedom, but as we've discussed in episode 1, that is at risk. If America is no longer, I want to move to Japan. It is not because my kids wanted to take a special trip there to have some Japanese ice cream. There are more profound reasons. A side note, if you're new to Japan and stuff Japanese, all the names may be frustrating. For pure art, you can simply treat Japan as having one historical period with one ruler. And everybody's name is Joe Smith. It will not hurt much. However, if you're going to take on the task, I'm going to do the Japanese names the Japanese way, with the family name first, followed by the given name. For basic information, Japan is an archipelago with a land area about 90% of California, but with 3 times the population today. Some may look down on the Japanese because they're known as the people who copied China first and then America. That's all true, but you have to admit they study well. In the early days, the Japanese imported from China not only the Chinese language, but also the Chinese art and philosophy. However, when they started to learn from the West, they quickly reversed their position with China. Today, 70% of the social and professional terms in the Chinese language is imported from Japanese, ranging from economy, quality, society, knowledge, freedom, to cell, nerve, and names of the bones. Many Chinese deny that fact. When I mentioned that on a radio talk show in Los Angeles, some phoned in to protest. Interestingly, one of them prefaced his objection by saying that he had majored in Japanese. This denial is deep. The difference between the Japanese and Chinese is that the Japanese are making an open effort to preserve their Chinese background as part of their cultural heritage. But the Chinese, really speaking a heavily accented Japanese nowadays, are trying to deny their past. When Japan tried to copy the US after the World War II, it quickly moved from fabricating tin boxes to selling cars that simply did not break down. Japan is inarguably one of the few countries that has successfully overcome what the economists call the middle-class trap and comfortably entered the ranks of the rich countries. While so many other countries, such as Hong Kong, which was at one time ranked similar to Japan, is at risk of falling back into that trap. In addition, from Japan are many cultural symbols in the US today, such as Hello Kitty and Pokemon, not to mention manga, the Japanese picture books, which have taken some 1/3 of the Japanese publishing business over there. History, together with the economy, politics and such, impacts art heavily. That's probably why I always wonder what Basquiat, who was my age, would be doing now if he were to grow old. Back to the Japanese history. In Heian period, roughly from the year 800 to 1200, Japan absorbed the Chinese Tang and Song cultures. The Chinese language was used in Japan, a bit like Latin in Europe. High scholars communicated with beautiful Chinese calligraphy and wrote perfect Chinese poetry. For example, Sesshū Tōyō fled the warring state violence in Japan and went to study in China in 1468. After returning to Japan the next year, his paintings showed clear Chinese influences. After the Warring State period, Japan entered a long period of peace from 1603 to 1868, which was known as the Tokugawa or Edo Period. Edo is known today as Tokyo. Tokugawa is a name of the so-called shogun, which is a short form of Sei Daishokun, the title of the emperor's special envoy to fight against the foreigners, empowered to make decisions without consulting the emperor. Only there were no foreigners. The biggest problem for the Tokugawa Bakufu was how to keep some 260 daimyos who ran their own fiefdoms independently under control. Tokugawa did this by a system that was known as Sankin Kodai, which requires the daimyos to stay in Edo for half of the time. Their families had to reside in Edo permanently. Spending so much time in Edo with little to do, the daimyos made Edo Japan's first urban area. The traditional Japanese architecture was quite adaptive to paintings. The use of folding screens, which were called byobu, and the sliding doors or pocket doors, which were called fusuma, made the floor plan quite reconfigurable. First of all, the Japanese took off their shoes at the door, making the floor area also the bed area. These are clearly sliding doors. How about these? Byobu or fusuma? The sliding doors were also used as outside walls, so the screens could be slid into a pocket somewhere hidden, and the entire building could open to nature. The Chinese and Koreans did the same, but they did it with hinged doors, so they had to suffer the eyesore of the vertical beams that received the door hinges. Frank Lloyd Wright was also particularly compulsive about this. With this design, the basic traditional Japanese architecture was essentially supporting beams and a roof. Everything else was configurable and easily replaceable. This was the age of Katsushika Hokusai and Utagawa Hiroshige. Yes, I'm talking about the woodblock printing in the Edo period. Hokusai's most famous woodblock prints are probably his 36 views of Mount Fuji. For Hiroshige, it is probably his 53 stations of the Tokaido, which was the coastal road necessary for these daimyos to travel to and from their fiefdoms, and 100 famous views of Edo. A skilled craftsman could probably make a set of wood plates in a matter of a few days and produce hundreds of copies of the painting. Technically, the original paintings were destroyed in the process. So what we have left in the way of original paintings are those that fail to make to the printing process. The woodblock prints made art widely available in Edo, Japan. Maybe because of this, the Chinese literati painting style, say in the style of Sesshū Tōyō, gave way to the so-called Ukiyo-e, or floating world paintings, popular with scenes from Yoshiwara district, the famous Yokaku, which in Japanese means play area, and commonly known today as the red light district. I should mention that the daimyos were not looking for skin pleasures. They could get plenty of that at home. They were looking for something else. The top-tier girls working there could write beautiful poems in similarly beautiful calligraphy. They were not the type we discussed in episode 2. Let's veer off for a minute so I can do something self-destructive. The website of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York says that this print is by Hiroshige. Probably the only thing that looks Hiroshige is the signature on the bottom left. The internet image quality is not good enough for me to make a definitive determination. The writing on the top left, which means famous places of eastern capital, the Sumida River, is clear enough to show that it is definitely not Hiroshige's handwriting for its inferior calligraphy quality. Those pleasure women in Yoshiwara could do much better. Of course, the root of the problem is that the painting itself is below Hiroshige's standard. So I doubt that this thing is by Hiroshige. By that I mean I have no doubt. Obviously, there is a valid argument that the great Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York knows more about the Japanese art than me. That is a true statement. But By the same token, people there have been famously wrong before and famously resisted owning up to their mistakes. By that I mean stupidity. Okay, I probably have ruined all the chances for my stuff to be ever exhibited there. In any case, the title that the Met gave to the painting is Boat on the Smida. Maybe Boats on the Smida is better. Of course, I, of all people, should not pick on anybody for their language problems, for I'm sure I have more. Nowhere on the painting is any writing that means boat. I don't see the point of naming the painting Boat something when the painter gave it the title of famous places of Eastern capital, indicating that this painting is part of a series. If you still don't agree with me, Edo changed its name to Tokyo, which means Eastern capital, in 1868. Hiroshige died 10 years before that. How did he know that the next emperor will move his capital from Kyoto, which in Japanese means the capital city, to Edo, which means in Japanese merely river residence? Okay, let's not make this endless. My main point here is probably what I've said before, that none of the conclusion here matters. What's important is that we use our own mind to think, because that's where the fun is. Even famous authorities could be wrong, sometimes badly. To be perfectly fair to the Met, it puts up a lot of its collections on the internet in the public domain. Now it is the number one place for me to go to find pieces to show. For that, I owe it a debt of gratitude. Okay, now we're fair. Let's get back to the topic. We noticed that all these paintings have a limited number of colors. That limitation is, of course, brought about by the fact that they are wood prints, in which only a limited number of plates is practical. Also, look at this Hokusai. There's no atmospheric perspective, the feature that's the result of woodblock printing. Furthermore, let's take a look at this boat. And this one here. How long do you think the one on the left would extend to? How about this much? So in reality, it really should stick out of the other side of the wave, right? Do you know how hard it is for two boats to get this close in the stormy ocean? Do they plan to live to tell their story? Look at this Hokusai. Even if we don't worry about the fact that Mount Fuji is surrounded by many minor peaks, is this scene realistically possible? Reality was not what these artists concerned themselves with. It was the poetry that they were after. Now, if you go back to look at the fake Hiroshige, you probably would agree with me that the painting is below the standard. In any case, the serene beauty of this Japanese style, with only a limited number of colors, no atmospheric perspective, not much concern for the reality, and the emphasis on poetry, impressed the early modern artists in Europe. They tried to flatten their images, reversing the trend starting from at least the Renaissance. Wisely, they didn't adopt woodblock printing, but used oil to emulate it. This one is by Van Gogh. I don't think Van Gogh had learned much Japanese because a lot of his writings on the sides made no sense. But at least the writing made it clear that it was about the 8 scenes from Yoshiwara, you know, the play area. I think Van Gogh would have liked the place if he'd ever made it there. So besides what we've already mentioned, Van Gogh realized the elegance of putting some kanji characters on the side, which was, and still is, a common practice of the Japanese artists. I will be really ignorant if I talk about Japanese art without mentioning Monet and his Japanese bridges. He loved the Japanese bridge scene so much that he had one built at his home in Givigny. The affinity of Van Gogh and Monet to the Japanese art is probably representative of artists of that era. It was the age of the Japanese influence, more so than the Islamic, would you say? I'll see you next time.